Right now, I do want to head to some of the other big stories that we are covering here at this hour. Take a live look over the White House in D.C. as we know that a third round of indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran on Iran's nuclear program ended yesterday with no deal reached. And Iran's foreign minister says the talks are planned to resume on Monday. Today, the U.S. State Department authorized the departure from Israel of non-emergency U.S. government personnel and their family. The advisory explains that people should consider leaving Israel while commercial flights are still available. Thursday's talks came as the Pentagon builds up its largest force of American warships and aircraft in the Middle East in decades. That includes 2 aircraft carrier strike groups. President Trump has continuously warned of potential military action against Iran if talks over its nuclear program fall apart. Trump addressed it all during his State of the Union address this week, with 2 Iranian officials responding, calling his claims, quote, big lies. All right, so as always, a lot to discuss here. I do want to bring in Jonathan Ruhe, JINSA's fellow for American strategy. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and helping to break it all down.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Of course. And first off, I wanted to ask you about this alert from the State Department regarding U.S. government personnel who are considered non-essential being evacuated, so to speak, from Israel. What do we read into this? What does this really mean for the situation as a whole?
So I think this is one more data point, and we have a few more with each passing day, that reinforces that Trump is indeed serious about having a military option, a plan B, if Iran continues to shuffle its feet and fail to negotiate on the nuclear program in earnest. Now, we've seen similar things in other countries in the Middle East by U.S. embassies in the several years since October 7th amid heightened tensions. But I think certainly this, again, sort of ratchets up that signal to the Iranians and also to our Israeli partners that the U.S. is probably getting more serious about this. I would just say, you mentioned a key consideration is the availability of commercial flights out of Israel. And we've certainly seen non-Israeli commercial airlines be much more willing to suspend those flights than perhaps the situation may dictate, and certainly that Israel's own national security calculus may reflect.
With the talks potentially continuing next week, again, we're hearing from Iran's foreign minister. We've heard from other officials that the talks could resume as early as Monday. Is there any indication that a deal could be reached anytime soon? Because, again, yesterday you had that third round of talks. We heard from both sides that they were potentially optimistic, but by the end of it there, no deal reached.
So I don't think we're significantly or meaningfully closer to a deal, which is sort of how the Iranians want to play this. I give the Trump administration credit for so far sticking to the general thrust of their demands, which is Iran has to give up its nuclear infrastructure. Iran will say we don't have a nuclear weapons program, even though that's a bald-faced lie. And therefore, we don't have anything to give up permanently or completely. We'll negotiate over minor details about the program. One noticeable detail is that the delegations reportedly included technical experts on nuclear and sanctions issues, which does not mean a deal is imminent, but may mean forward progress as far as the Iranians are concerned, because that means we could drag out the talks with very detailed, time-consuming, elaborate back and forth, which is exactly what the Iranians want right now. They want to play for time.
All right, so what do we kind of watch for at this point? I always ask that toward the end, but I wanted to kind of get into it now because all of this continues to develop. We get updates. We see President Trump make a comment. We see Iran's foreign minister make a comment. Then Iran's supreme leader will post something on social media. So what are we watching for, especially into the weekend?
So I think a couple things on the negotiating front. I don't think we're going to see much new because, again, those are sort of in some form of purgatory. I would note that a key U.S. move most recently has been to send our F-22 stealth fighters to Ovda base. It's an air base in Israel. My organization has done a lot of work on this, and as we say, that is effectively a third aircraft carrier for the United States in the region, even though it's only a dozen aircraft, and there's also refueling aircraft in Israel as well. Those forces in Israel can be used for offensive operations against Iran, which is not true for any of our other bases in the rest of the region. Those have restrictions on them against that sort of thing. So I think really the U.S. is in a forward deployed posture where, essentially, like we saw with Operation Midnight Hammer on the strikes on Iran's nuclear program last year, or the Israeli attacks on Iran last year, the U.S. could sort of go from a running start at this point because of the size of the forces in the region that you mentioned, because of how ready and postured they are. So, as someone who watches this very closely, I could easily imagine waking up in the middle of the night to see that operations against Iran have begun.
And it's interesting to note, this is actually a post from Lucas Tomlinson with Fox News talking about what we were discussing earlier as it relates to the alert that was issued by the State Department. He says a similar evacuation was ordered 8 days before Operation Midnight Hammer. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. Now, according to Iranian officials, the talks themselves between Iran and the U.S. are actually set to take place in Vienna. We've seen several different locations here. What is the significance there of holding these talks in Vienna?
So there's a recurring theme with these talks. The first round was supposed to happen in a Middle Eastern country that's a partner of the United States. Iran got the move to Oman. Oman plays an active role in trying to be a neutral intermediary between the United States and Iran. Similar with Geneva, obviously in neutral Switzerland. Vienna plays a similar role. Iran likes the signal this sends, which is we're on the same plane with the United States. We will not be bullied. These are truly negotiations among equals. And also, one thing that Iran has continued to successfully insist on, and which helps drag out the talks and serve Iran's goals so they go nowhere, is that there's always a neutral intermediary between them, whether it's the Omanis or someone else. Iran has always successfully insisted these are indirect talks. Basically, we do not, it is not within our respect to meet directly with the American negotiators.
As we kind of watch all of this play out, we are keeping a very close eye on the situation that is developing there. We're watching, as I mentioned, we hear comments from just about everyone, President Trump, the leaders there over in Iran. What do you make of that military presence that we're seeing in the Middle East? Because I mentioned this off the top, but that is the largest American military presence in that region in decades.
So it's very interesting. Trump issued a red line against the Iranian regime about putting down protests at the start of the year. And at the time, he discovered he did not have enough ready military options in the region, given the need to deal with Venezuela and also the constant need to have a presence in the Pacific. He has remarkably overcorrected for that deficit and is now trying to, in a way we've never seen the U.S. do before in 4 previous rounds of negotiations with the Iranians, make them seriously realize that the U.S. has a credible military alternative to endless negotiations. Iran is going to see how much they can get out of that, try to call America's bluff. Iran also has a higher risk calculus because the regime feels its back is more to the wall after the protests and Trump's threats to intervene there. But really, I've studied this for a long time. Iran, rightfully, before this, never had a reason to think the United States would actually literally pull the trigger if the Iranians keep dragging their feet. Iran's going to keep testing that as long as they can, but I think this time, they may actually see the U.S. can go straight from talking with the Iranians to executing a military option.
Could this be the end of the Iranian regime as a whole? Are we watching that kind of play out?
They are weaker than they have ever been before. The protests certainly showed that, both in the breadth of the protests and the grievances they had. The Iranian regime cannot fix the protesters' grievances. It's too corrupt, it's too brutal, it's too inefficient. So these protests will continue to happen. Also, the regime wants the Iranian people to see the war last year with the United States and Israel as a success. The people, by and large, do not. It exposed how weak the regime truly is. So this regime will certainly collapse at some point, and it does not require regime change by the United States to do that. This is not an Iraq-style conundrum or solution. The only question is when, not if. And also the question is how. Can the U.S. do what we did successfully under Ronald Reagan to collapse the Soviet Union, which is support forces inside Iran to help the people overthrow their regime. That's a more realistic possibility now than even a year ago.
All right, Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. As I mentioned, we're going to watch how all of this plays out into the weekend and next week, of course, with those talks set for Monday, according to Iran's foreign minister. Anything we missed, anything that you want to make sure to add here before I let you go?
I would just underscore the point that for decades there's been a consensus informally in Washington for sure that the Iranian regime is here to stay. We have to deal with it whether we like it or not. And then the only question is, well, how specifically do we deal with it? Is it sanctions? Is it diplomacy? Is it a mix of the two? I think I would encourage everyone to stop thinking in those terms. We really are in a different paradigm now, which is, this regime is tottering. It's fearful. That means it may be more likely to lash out for sure and also dig its heels in. But that should not daunt the U.S. or its partners. Things really are coming to a head now in a way they never have before in this decades-long standoff with the Iranian regime.
Jonathan Ruhe, JINSA's Fellow for American Strategy. Thank you again for being here with us. We definitely appreciate it.
Thank you as always for having me. My pleasure.